3 days from now, the king waiting at Thermopylae will be dead. The pass he came to defend will be open. The Persian army will march into central Greece almost unchecked. And Athens, the city that had humiliated Persia 10 years earlier, will burn, August 480 BC. On a narrow strip of land between a cliff and the sea, a Spartan king is waiting with roughly 7,000 men. A few miles to the north, the largest army the ancient world has ever assembled is grinding its way down through Greece. Somewhere between 100,000 and 300,000 soldiers, drawn from every corner of the Persian Empire. The king's name is Leonidas. He knows the math. He knows what is coming. And yet 25 centuries after this moment, we are still telling his story, not as a defeat, as a victory. The supreme victory, the 300 Spartans, Molon Labe, come and take them. A phrase that is today the motto of U.S. Special Operations Command Central, the slogan of countless tattoos and t-shirts, a rallying cry shouted from political rallies to military parades, a Hollywood film that earned $500 million at the box office, a reference point that 2,000 years of military history has not been able to forget. Here is the strange part. Thermopylae was a catastrophe. The pass fell. The army Leonidas was supposed to delay swept through almost unopposed. Athens burned. By any military metric you can imagine, this is a story about failure. So how does a failure become the most famous last stand in human history? How does a tiny rearguard wiped out in 3 days end up shaping the way the West thinks about freedom sacrifice and courage for 2,500 years? That is the question. To answer it, we have to go back about a decade before Leonidas ever marched north. September 490 BC. A small Athenian army marches out to a plain on the Aegean coast called Marathon. They are outnumbered, outranged, and almost certainly expecting to die. Instead, they win. They rout the invasion force sent by the Persian king Darius, drive his soldiers back into the sea, and kill, by ancient counts, more than 6,000 of them. For the Persians, this is not just a defeat, it is a humiliation. The Persian Empire in 490 BC is the largest political entity human civilization has ever produced. It stretches from the Indus River in modern Pakistan to the Aegean coast of Turkey. It has paved roads, an imperial mail system, multilingual courts, and an economy denominated in standardized gold coinage. And a coalition of dusty Greek city-states on the western edge of the known world has just publicly embarrassed it. Darius begins to plan a second invasion. He never gets to lead it. Within a few years, he is dead. The throne passes to his son. His name is Xerxes. He is the new king of kings. And he inherits two things from his father, an empire and a grudge. For Xerxes, this is personal. Revenge against Greece is not just a strategic project. It is a debt to his father's memory and a test of his own legitimacy as a ruler. For 4 years, he prepares. He raises an army drawn from across the empire, soldiers from the steppes of Central Asia, from the deserts of Egypt, from the highlands of Persia itself. He stockpiles grain along the planned route of march. He builds a fleet of perhaps 1,000 warships. He has engineers cut a canal through the Mount Athos Peninsula just to avoid the storms that had wrecked his father's earlier fleet. By the time he is finished, Xerxes has assembled a military operation that ancient writers will spend the next 2,000 years struggling to find words for. In Greece, the news lands like a slow-moving earthquake. The Greek world in 481 BC is not a country. It is a patchwork of independent city-states, a few hundred of them scattered around the Aegean, each with its own laws, its own gods, its own pride, and an almost reflexive habit of fighting the others. Athens and Sparta, the two largest powers, spend most of their time circling each other in mutual suspicion. A united Greek response to anything is historically almost a contradiction in terms, but the scale of Xerxes' preparations is impossible to ignore. In the autumn of 481 BC, delegates from the major Greek city-states meet at Corinth and do something rare. They form an alliance, the Hellenic League. For the first time in living memory, sworn rivals agree to pool their forces against a single external threat. From this moment, the question is no longer whether the Greeks will fight. It is where and how. The where is geography. Mainland Greece is mostly mountain. Armies can only move through a small number of passes and along a few narrow coastal roads. If you can block those, you can hold back a force many times your size. The Greek War Council quickly identifies the best candidate, a pass on the eastern coast of central Greece where the road south squeezes between sheer cliffs and the sea. The locals call it the Hot Gates Thermopylae because of the sulfurous hot springs that bubble up nearby. In the spring of 480 BC, Xerxes' army begins to move. The Persians cross from Asia into Europe at the narrowest point of the Hellespont, the strait we now call the Dardanelles. To get the army across, Xerxes' engineers do something unprecedented. They build 2 pontoon bridges out of nearly 700 ships lashed together, weighted with stone, and anchored against the current. When the first set of bridges is destroyed in a storm, Xerxes, according to Herodotus, has the sea itself whipped 300 times as punishment, then orders the bridges rebuilt. The army then crosses. By some ancient accounts, it takes 7 days and 7 nights of continuous marching for the column to file across. Most modern estimates place Xerxes' fighting force at somewhere between 100,000 and 300,000 men. Herodotus claims more than 2.5 million. The exact number is one of the longest-running debates in ancient history, but the precise figure is less important than what the figure means. This is not a punitive raid. This is not a force coming to demand tribute and leave. The pontoon bridges the supply depots, the canal at Athens. These are the signs of an army coming to stay. The message lands. Across northern Greece, city after city surrenders without a fight. By August, the Persians are approaching Thermopylae. In Sparta, there is a problem. Sparta in 480 BC is not the largest Greek city-state. It is not the richest, but it is, without question, the most militarized society in the ancient Mediterranean. Spartan boys are taken from their families at age 7 and put through a brutal 23-year military education called the agoge. Spartan citizens, the Spartiates, are forbidden from practicing any trade other than war. And the whole system rests on something most modern audiences do not associate with Sparta at all: a vast underclass of state-owned slaves called helots. Descendants of conquered neighbors, the helots outnumber their Spartan masters by perhaps 7 or 8 to 1. The Spartans keep them in line through ritualized terror, annual ceremonies where young Spartan men are encouraged to hunt and kill any helot they find in the countryside. This is not a side note in the Spartan story. This is the foundation it stands on. Sparta is also, uniquely among Greek states, a dual monarchy. 2 kings rule at the same time, drawn from 2 royal families, the Aegaeid and the Eurypontid lines. In 480 BC, the senior of the 2 kings is a man in his 60s named Leonidas, of the Aegaeid house. By Spartan standards, he is past his physical prime. He is also a king who has spent his entire adult life preparing for a war exactly like this one. The problem is timing. The Persians are arriving in the middle of the Carnea, a religious festival sacred to Apollo. Spartan law, and there is nothing more inflexible in the ancient world than Spartan law, forbids the main army from marching during a major festival. This is the rigidity that built Spartan dominance. It is also, at this moment, paralyzing them. Leonidas compromises. He cannot march with the full army. So he selects 300 elite Spartiates by tradition, only men with living sons, men who could afford to die, and marches north with them, picking up about 7,000 allied Greek soldiers along the way. Thebans, Thespians, Phocians, Locrians, Corinthians, Arcadians, Mantineans, and others. The plan is to hold the pass at Thermopylae until the main Spartan army can follow once the festival ends. This is the force that arrives at the Hot Gates in early August, 480 BC. The pass they are defending is, by modern standards, almost incomprehensible. The coastline has moved. The Malian Gulf today sits several kilometers further out than it did in antiquity, pushed back by 25 centuries of sediment from local rivers. In 480 BC, the geography was tighter, more vertical, more claustrophobic than anything you can see when you visit the site today. The pass, at its narrowest point, what the ancient sources call the Middle Gate, was about 15 meters wide, less than the length of a modern city bus. To the south, the cliffs of Mount Calidramon rose almost vertically. To the north, the deep mud and salt water of the Malian Gulf. There was no flanking. There was no cavalry charge. Whoever entered this passage had to come straight at whoever was already inside it. The Greeks find a half-collapsed defensive wall in the pass, a relic of an old conflict. They rebuild it. They take up positions, and they wait. A few days later, the Persian army arrives at the plain to the north of the pass, and sets up camp. Xerxes, by every account, is baffled. The army he commands is in modern terms a continent's worth of soldiers. He has bowmen from Scythia, infantry from Bactria, cavalry from Lydia, marines from Phoenicia. He has 10,000 elite heavy infantry called the Immortals, so named because the unit was always maintained at exactly 10,000 men, replacements stepping forward the moment a man fell. By the most conservative estimate, his fighting force outnumbers the Greeks at the pass by more than 10 to 1. He has no military reason to expect resistance, so he waits. He waits, by Herodotus's account, 4 days. 4 days in his tent, expecting at any moment to hear that the Greeks have looked at his army and quietly slipped away in the night. They do not slip away. On the 4th day, Xerxes sends out a single horseman to ride close to the Greek camp and report back. What the scout sees is one of the strangest scenes in all of ancient warfare. The Spartan soldiers are not preparing defenses, they are not praying, they are not even in armor. They are sitting outside the wall, combing their long hair. They are exercising naked. They are oiling their bodies. They are calm. The scout returns and reports. Xerxes does not understand, so he calls in his advisor. This is the third person in our story you need to keep track of. His name is Demaratus. He is a former king of Sparta, exiled from the city years earlier in a political dispute, now living at the Persian court as one of Xerxes' senior advisors on Greek affairs. He knows Sparta from the inside. And he tells Xerxes plainly Spartans groom themselves before battle when they intend to fight to the death. The hair, the oil, the calm, these are not signs of complacency. They are a ritual. They are the things Spartans do when they are getting ready to die. Xerxes, according to the sources, laughs. He still does not believe what he is being told. He waits one more day. Then, on the morning of what we will come to call Day 1 of the Battle of Thermopylae, he gives the order to advance. August 480 BC, the morning of Day 1. Xerxes opens the battle the way he opens most battles, with sheer mass. He orders forward the Medes and the Sicilians units drawn from the central provinces of his empire to charge the pass and clear it. What happens next is something the Persian high command has almost certainly never seen before. The Greeks in the pass are not arranged in a wave or a crowd. They are standing in a phalanx, a tight rectangular formation, shields, locked spears protruding, ranks deep enough that the men in the back can rest, while the men in the front fight. The narrow geography of the pass means the Persians cannot bring more than a few hundred soldiers into contact with the Greek line at any one time. For the duration of the engagement, numerical superiority is irrelevant. And when the Medes and Sicilians hit the Greek line, they do not break it. They die against it. The Persian soldiers attacking the pass are mostly light infantry. They carry wicker shields, short spears, and devastating composite bows that at range can shred lightly armored opponents. Up close in a narrow corridor, against a wall of heavy bronze, they have almost nothing. A Greek hoplite at Thermopylae was, by some scholarly estimates, the heaviest infantry soldier alive on planet Earth in 480 BC. Picture this. A solid bronze breastplate weighing about 20 pounds, a fully enclosed bronze helmet with narrow eye slits and a small breathing gap, bronze greaves protecting the shins, a wooden spear 7 to 9 feet long, the dory weighted at one end with a bronze butt spike, and then the aspis, a concave wooden shield more than 3 feet across, faced in bronze, weighing about 15 pounds by itself. Total kit weight somewhere between 60 and 70 pounds. The men in this armor have spent their entire adult lives drilling to move in it as a unit. Pause here for a moment, because this is a good place to address something. If your mental image of a Spartan soldier comes from the 2006 film 300 bare-chested six-pack abs, leather underwear, red cape, that image is, historically speaking, nonsense. The Spartans at Thermopylae were not athletes in capes. They were essentially walking bronze tanks. The reason they win in this narrow pass is precisely because they are wearing armor that no light infantry in the Persian army can punch through with a short spear or a wicker shield. The cinematic image is beautiful. It is also exactly backwards. So the Medes and Sicilians die, by the hundreds, then by the thousands. At one point on day 1, the Spartans even attempt one of the most difficult tactical maneuvers in ancient warfare, a feigned retreat. The front rank on signal pretends to break and run. The Persians, sensing victory, surge forward in pursuit and lose their own formation. Then, on another signal, the Spartans wheel around lock shields and slaughter the disorganized Persians at close range. This is not improvisation. This is choreography. It is the result of decades of drilled rehearsal. Xerxes, watching from a throne his soldiers have set up on the slopes overlooking the pass, reportedly stands up 3 times in horror during the day. By nightfall on day 1, the pass is still held. The Persian dead are stacked by some accounts in front of the Greek wall. From this moment, the pattern is set. The hot gates are not a battlefield. They are a meat grinder. Day 2. Xerxes commits his best troops. He orders forward the Immortals. The Immortals were the elite of the Persian imperial army. 10,000 heavy infantry, kept at exactly 10,000 men. Any soldier killed or wounded was immediately replaced from a reserve, so the unit's strength never visibly fluctuated, which gave them in ancient eyes the appearance of being unkillable. They were the closest thing the Persian Empire had to a Spartan equivalent professional warrior class. They die in the pass the same way the Medes died in the pass. The geometry is unforgiving. They have to come at the Greeks a few dozen at a time, into the shields of men who have been training for this for 30 years. By the end of day 2, the Persians have suffered staggering losses. Herodotus claims 20,000 dead, which is almost certainly exaggerated, but the real number is high enough that the Persian command begins to lose its composure. Xerxes is now, by ancient testimony, beginning to suspect that the man Demaratus described, the Spartan who grooms himself before dying, was not exaggerating. And here is where the story turns. Late on the evening of day 2, a local man arrives at the Persian camp and asks to speak with the king. This is the 4th person to keep track of. His name is Ephialtes of Trachis. He is a shepherd, or possibly a small landholder from the surrounding region. He is in every meaningful sense a nobody. And he holds in his head a piece of information that in the next 12 hours is going to change the course of human history. Ephialtes tells Xerxes that there is another way through, a goat path. Not a road, not a marked route, a path used by shepherds climbing over the shoulder of Mount Calidramon around the back of the pass. If Persian troops follow it through the night, they can come down on the Greek position from behind by dawn. His motive, according to the sources, is money, a reward from the king. The price of betraying his own people works out in ancient accounting to perhaps a few talents of silver, enough to make a man wealthy for life, but not by the standards of empire. Expensive. Xerxes accepts the offer. He gives the assignment to Hydarnes, the commander of the Immortals. Hydarnes takes the survivors of his unit and, guided by Ephialtes, begins the climb. They march in silence by torchlight. Herodotus says the most distinctive sound on the climb is the crunch of oak leaves underfoot in the autumn dark. About halfway up, they encounter 1,000 Phocian guards stationed on the path. Leonidas had not forgotten the possibility of a flanking maneuver. He had posted a watch. But the Phocians are taken by surprise. They believe at first that the Persians have come specifically for them, and they fall back to defensive positions on the higher ground. The Persians do not stop to fight. They fire a volley of arrows to keep the Phocians pinned, then simply step around them and keep moving toward the pass. From this moment, the Battle of Thermopylae is decided. Everything that happens next is no longer about tactics. It is about choice. Dawn, day 3. Greek runners reach Leonidas with the news. The Persians are coming down the mountain behind him. By midday, the pass will be flanked. The defensive position that is held for 2 days is about to be turned into a trap. Leonidas convenes a council of his commanders. The decision they have to make is straightforward. The strategic mission, holding the pass long enough to delay the Persian advance and let the main Greek army organize a defensive line further south, is over. The pass cannot be held. Standing still now means dying for nothing. So Leonidas does something that, for the next 2,500 years, will be the most analyzed decision in the history of small unit warfare. He dismisses most of the army. He orders the bulk of the Greek coalition contingents to retreat south, back to their cities, save themselves, fight another day. The Mantineans go, the Tegeans go, the Corinthians go. The Phocians, already cut off on the mountain, melt away into the hills. By the time the dismissal is complete, the 7,000-strong Greek force at Thermopylae has shrunk to a much smaller number, but Leonidas himself stays, with his 300 Spartans. And here is where one of the most durable myths in Western history needs to be cleared away. We all know the story. 300 Spartans alone against the entire Persian army. The film, the graphic novel, the merchandise. The 300, except that is not what happened on the morning of day 3. When Leonidas dismissed the bulk of the army, 2 contingents refused to leave. The first was 700 soldiers from the small Greek city of Thespiae, under the command of an officer named Demophilus. The Thespians were not professional warriors. They were not raised in the Agoge. They were farmers, potters, and citizen soldiers. And on the morning of day 3, they made the same decision Leonidas made without anyone's compulsion. They stayed. The second contingent was 400 Thebans. Their motives are disputed. Herodotus, writing decades later, suggests that Leonidas had been holding them as hostages to ensure Theban good behavior, and that they only surrendered at the first chance they got. Most modern historians regard this as later Athenian propaganda against Thebes. The Thebans probably stayed and fought willingly until the situation became hopeless. The truth, we will never know. And then there were the helots. The helots are almost never mentioned in the popular version of the story. But every Spartan citizen at Thermopylae had brought with him at least one armed helot servant. By some scholarly estimates, perhaps as many as 900 helots stood with the Spartans on the morning of day 3. These men were not free. They were the property of the Spartan state. We don't know what they thought. We don't know whether they chose to stay or whether they were ordered to. The Greek sources almost completely ignore them, but they died there too. So the famous 300 were never 300. The final stand at Thermopylae was made by something closer to 2,300 men, Spartans, Thespians, Thebans, and an underclass of slaves whose names we will never know. Why does Leonidas stay? The answer is several things at once. The first is religious. Before he marched north, the Delphic oracle had given Sparta a famously ambiguous prophecy. Either a Spartan king would fall, or the city of Sparta itself would be destroyed. Leonidas, a man trained from age 7 to take the demands of religion literally, appears to have decided to fulfill the prophecy himself. The second is strategic. Even if the pass falls, a defending force that keeps fighting buys time. The Greek navy, locked in an indecisive sea battle a few miles up the coast at Artemisium, needs that time to disengage. The Greek cities to the south need that time to evacuate civilians and organize a defense. Every hour Leonidas holds, someone else can run. The third reason is harder to talk about, but it is real. Leonidas is 60 years old. He is a king. He understands in a way that perhaps no other commander in this story understands the propaganda value of his own death. A Spartan king who runs is a Spartan king who delegitimizes the entire Spartan system. A Spartan king who dies fighting is a Spartan king who becomes a myth. He almost certainly knows this. The decision to stay is, among other things, the decision to be remembered. There is a vignette from this morning that captures the mood. A Spartan officer, Herodotus, gives us his name. Denicus is told by a panicked local that the Persian archers are so numerous that their arrows, when fired all at once, will blot out the sun. Denicus does not flinch. He answers in the laconic Spartan style that will become its own literary genre across the next 2,000 years. Good. Then we will fight in the shade. It is impossible to know if Denicus actually said this. The line comes to us through Herodotus a generation later. What matters is that it survived. Lines like this, economical, defiant, almost casually contemptuous of death, would become the export product of Sparta for the next 25 centuries. Long after the actual Spartan army has crumbled, long after Sparta itself has become a tourist site, this voice, the Spartan voice, will keep speaking. The Spartans, the Thespians, the Thebans, and the helots take their positions in the pass. The wall is behind them. Above them, on the slope, the immortals are now descending. In front of them, the main Persian army is forming up for one final assault. This time, the Greeks do not wait inside the wall. They march out into the wider part of the pass. They go to meet the Persians in the open. The final fight at Thermopylae is short. Outside the wall, in the wider part of the pass, the Greeks meet the Persian army in the open. Their spears, used too hard against too many shields over 3 days, begin to splinter and shatter. As the wooden hafts give way, the Greeks draw their short swords. The xiphus, a leaf-bladed weapon less than 1.5 feet long, and keep fighting at close range. According to Herodotus, when the swords break, some of them are reduced to fighting with their bare hands and their teeth. Leonidas falls early in the chaos. The sources do not give us a clean death scene. Sometime in the first wave of the open ground engagement, the Spartan king goes down. What happens next is one of the most ferocious moments in any battle of the ancient world. The Greeks refuse to lose the body. To leave Leonidas on the field to let the Persians strip and parade his corpse would be, in the Spartan moral universe, a failure worse than dying. So the surviving Spartans wheel around and fight their way back to where their king has fallen. According to Herodotus, the Persians close in to seize the body 4 separate times. 4 separate times the Spartans drive them back. Eventually, the Greeks succeed in recovering Leonidas and pulling his body back behind their lines. By this point, the Thermopylae detachment under Hydarnes has finished coming down the mountain and is forming up at the rear of the pass. The Greeks are now fully encircled. According to Herodotus, the 400 Thebans separate from the formation at this point and surrender to the Persians. Many modern historians think this is later Athenian propaganda against Thebes written to discredit a rival city. We will probably never know the truth. What we do know is that the remaining defenders, perhaps 1,000 men by now, retreat to a small rise of ground inside the pass called Kolonos. They make their last stand there. The Persian high command, by all accounts, has had enough of close combat. They have lost too many men to too few. They are not going to send their soldiers into spear range again to kill the last of these men. Instead, Xerxes orders them surrounded at range. Persian archers, the same archers Leonidas had joked about the morning before, take up positions around the hill, and they fire. Herodotus says it took volley after volley. By the time the silence comes, every Spartan, every Thespian, and every helot on the hill is dead. It is mid-afternoon on day 3. The Persian army marches south. They take their losses, somewhere between 20,000 killed by ancient accounts, and a much lower figure that modern historians find more credible, and they keep moving. Within a week, they are in Boeotia. Within 2 weeks, they are in Attica. Athens has been evacuated. The civilian population has fled to the nearby island of Salamis, to the coast of the Peloponnese, to anywhere the Persians are not. The city is mostly empty when the army arrives. The Persians enter it without opposition, climb the Acropolis, and burn what they find: the temples, the public buildings, the houses. The smoke from the burning city is visible for miles across the Gulf. By any metric a Persian general would have recognized, in 480 BC, the campaign is going perfectly. Thermopylae, the great choke point, has been overrun in 3 days. The capital city of the most aggressive Greek state has been captured and torched. Resistance should be collapsing. It is not. About a month after Thermopylae, in the strait between Salamis and the Greek mainland, the Greek navy, led by an Athenian commander named Themistocles, lures the Persian fleet into close water where its numerical advantage cannot be used. Over the course of a single day, the Persians lose perhaps 200 ships. Xerxes himself, watching from a throne the Persians have set up on a hillside overlooking the strait, sees his fleet destroyed in real time. With winter approaching and his sea logistics shattered, he withdraws to Persia, leaving a portion of his army behind under one of his generals to finish the campaign the following spring. That portion is destroyed at a battle called Plataea in 479 BC, the year after Thermopylae. The Greek allied army, the one Leonidas and his men had bought time for, fields tens of thousands of hoplites. On a wide plain north of Athens, it crushes the remaining Persian land force in a single day of fighting. The Persian invasion of Greece is over. Here is the part of the story that almost never makes it into the popular telling. Thermopylae did not save Greece. Thermopylae did not stop the Persian invasion. Thermopylae did not even significantly slow it down. The Persians took the pass on schedule. They walked into Athens on schedule. They were defeated months later at sea by the Athenians at Salamis, and the year after that on land by a coalition led by Sparta at Plataea. Strategically, Thermopylae was a failure. The man who saved Greece was Themistocles, the Athenian admiral. The army that finished the job was the Greek allied army at Plataea, led by Leonidas's own nephew, a general named Pausanias. So how does Thermopylae become the story we remember, and not Salamis and not Plataea? It begins almost immediately with poetry. In the months after the battle, A poet named Simonides, one of the most famous lyric voices in the Greek world, composes an epigram for the burial mound at Thermopylae. 2 lines. In English translation, "Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie." It is a small poem. It is also one of the most repeated pieces of language in Western history. It is carved on the modern monument at Thermopylae. It has been quoted in funeral orations from the Roman Empire through the Renaissance to the present day. 2 lines. They survived the burning of libraries. They survived the collapse of the Greek language. They are still in your search engine right now, roughly 40 years after the battle. The historian Herodotus arrives at Thermopylae as part of the research for his great work, The Histories. He interviews survivors. He reads earlier sources. He walks the ground. The version of the story he writes, the dialogue with Demaratus, the comb scene, the line from Dienekes, the 4 times recovery of the king's body, is the version we have been telling ever since. It is also almost certainly a curated version. Herodotus is writing for a Greek audience that needs a hero story. He shapes the material accordingly. By the 4th century BC, less than 100 years after the battle, school children across the Greek world are memorizing Spartan death sayings. Leonidas is becoming a moral exemplar in the way Achilles had been a generation before. The number 300, leaving aside the Thespians, the Thebans, the helots, and the broader Greek allied contingents, is becoming the number people remember. 2 things happen at once. The first is that the loss is reframed as a moral victory. Yes, the Greeks lost the pass, but they lost it the right way. They died obedient to their laws. They turned tactical defeat into ethical demonstration. This is, in propaganda terms, what we would now call a soft power masterstroke. The second is that Sparta, which would spend the rest of the war being mostly absent from the most important battles, and which would, over the following century, be politically defeated, demographically hollowed out, and eventually rendered irrelevant by the rise of Macedon, and then Rome manages, through the curation of this one story, to dominate the historical imagination of the West. 2,500 years later, almost nobody can name 3 battles fought by classical Sparta, but everybody can name Thermopylae. Here is another thing the popular version of the story leaves out. The Spartans at Thermopylae were not in any sense recognizable to a modern audience dying for freedom. Sparta was not a democracy. Sparta was a dual monarchy with an oligarchic council, and its entire social structure depended on the brutal control of an enslaved underclass, the helots, who outnumbered the citizen population by perhaps 7 to 1. The Spartan economy, the Spartan army, the Spartan way of life, all of it was sustained by a population that had no legal rights, no political voice, and could be killed by their masters at any moment. The Spartans at Thermopylae were fighting to protect this system. They were fighting for Spartan independence, Spartan dominance over the Peloponnese, Spartan religious law. They were not fighting for representative government. The closest thing the ancient world had to that was Athens. And the Spartans had spent most of the previous century intermittently at war with Athens. When generals and politicians for the next 2,000 years invoke Thermopylae as a battle for freedom, when American special forces adopt Molin Lab, come and take them as their motto, when the slogan is co-opted by modern gun rights activists, when it appears on flags and license plates and tattoos, the freedom they are imagining is historically an anachronism. The Spartans did not have it. They did not want it. They would have found the concept incomprehensible. The phrase itself, molon lab, is almost certainly something Leonidas never said. It comes to us through Plutarch, writing nearly 600 years after the battle in a collection of sayings attributed to famous Spartans. By the time Plutarch records it, the line has had centuries to be invented, polished, attributed, and re-attributed. What survives is not the historical Leonidas. It is the legend of him. But by then, the legend is the only Leonidas that matters. There is one more thing worth saying before we go back to the pass. If you stand at Thermopylae today, you can see the modern monument. You can read Simonides' epigram in Greek letters carved into the stone. There is a bronze statue of Leonidas, spear lifted helmet on, looking north toward where the Persian army would have come from. There is also a smaller monument, much less visited, much less photographed, to the 700 Thespians who stayed. The Thespians did not have the agoge. They were not raised from childhood to view their own death as the highest possible expression of their citizenship. They had not been trained for 30 years to lock shields and step forward into a wall of incoming spears. They were ordinary citizens of an ordinary Greek town. On the morning of day 3, when Leonidas told them they could leave, they made a decision without a propaganda apparatus, without a religious prophecy, without an oracle, to stand and die with the Spartans. In some ways, the Thespian choice is the more remarkable one. The Spartans were doing what they had been engineered from age 7 to do. The Thespians were doing it cold. But the Thespians did not have a Simonides to write their epigram. They did not have a Herodotus to interview their survivors. They had no survivors, so they are a footnote in the story. And the story belongs to the Spartans. Which brings us back to August 480 BC, the pass. The narrow strip of land between a cliff and the sea. Leonidas is waiting. He has roughly 7,000 men. To the north, the largest army the ancient world has ever assembled is grinding its way down through Greece. He knows the math. He knows what is coming. 3 days from this moment, he will be dead. The pass behind him will be open. The Persian army will march unchecked into central Greece, and Athens will burn. And from that defeat, from that tactical catastrophe, 25 centuries of myth will emerge. A 2-line poem that no library has been able to lose. A phrase molon labe that will outlive every empire that ever spoke it. A film, a graphic novel. A name shouted from political stages and tattooed onto soldiers' arms. A template for every heroic last stand that comes after the Alamo. In 1836, the Light Brigade in 1854. Rorke's Drift in 1879, every they shall not pass moment in every war ever since. Thermopylae teaches us something uncomfortable about how history actually works. The battle that wins the war is not always the battle that wins the story. Salamis saved Greece. Plataea finished the job. But Thermopylae, the disaster, the rearguard that was wiped out in 3 days, in a pass that fell on schedule, is the one we kept. What survives, in the long run, is not necessarily the strategic outcome. It is the image, the pose, the line, the men, half naked, or in 70 pounds of bronze, depending on who is telling it, standing in a narrow place against an impossible number, refusing to move. The Greeks lost the pass. They won the next 25 centuries.